Great. So today I'm going to be doing an introduction to version control, Git and GitHub. And I want to talk about first, before I go into it, that Git is incredibly powerful and it's also very intimidating and complicated. So yeah, we're going to take our time. We're going to go through each concept as we go through it. And if I'm going too fast or too slow, let me know in the chat. Feel free to ask me to go over things or ask me any questions about anything you're unclear about. We're a small enough group this evening that I think it should be fine. So yeah, don't feel bad about asking a question. If you're asking something, it's probably not clear to other people as well. So yeah, but just to start, Git is worth learning. It's really worthwhile because it opens the doors to a lot of different things. So to get the best out of it, you don't need to understand absolutely everything either. And we will be going through some exercises today. So hopefully you will have GitHub accounts and you will have the ability to either edit something in an IDE or edit through your browser through GitHub, which we'll go through in a bit. But just a little bit of an intro to me. I am a career switcher. I come from a non-traditional background. I did psychology at university, and I'm really keen on empowering other people to make the switch in their lives as well. And I also think that yeah, as builders of technology, I'm passionate that we have as diverse a group of people doing that building. So yeah. And hopefully by the end of today's workshop, we will have an understanding of what version control is, even if it's just a surface level understanding. Hopefully it's a little bit deeper, but that's completely up to you. Some of these concepts might take a couple of times going over just to get them fully. We'll be going into why we need it and an introduction to some of the commands that we'll be using most of the time. We'll create our own repository and we will push and pull between a repository as well. We will go over the concept of reserving merge conflicts, and then if we have time, we will get to improving and styling our GitHub profiles. And hopefully by the end, you feel empowered to handle any Git errors that you encounter, because that is the reality of using Git and GitHub is you will have some errors sometimes. So yeah, if you want to understand it fully, I think it's really important to go right back to the basics. And yeah, so that's where I'm going to start today. So most of you will have had to co-author files and create presentations with other people. And what that will have looked like a few years ago is sharing things on a USB, emailing things to each other. But now that looks like doing things on Google Docs, where you've got collaborative documents and you're not having to do the thing where you're naming something final version or final version v2, final version v3, and that kind of thing, which you might be doing if you're emailing things around. And so both of those ways make it really difficult to remember what the most up-to-date version of the thing is, but also see the history of that thing and be able to share that with people who haven't had access to every single version that you've created. So what is so amazing with Git is every single version that everybody has access to, if you've got access to the main version of a repository, you'll have all the history of every single change that's ever been made, and you'll be able to move back and forwards between those things. You'll also have your name attached to every change that you make, and you'll be able to see the finalized version that you want to commit and save to the repository as you're doing that. And so all of that contributes to having a really safe backup. If you make any major errors or something happens that takes production down and breaks something, it's so easy using GitHub and Git to go back to the last working version and understand what happened. Yeah, so a few of the benefits that I mentioned, you can never accidentally save a file you didn't mean to. So with Google Docs and things, you save automatically at intervals, which could create really cluttered edit history. And so this is important context to why it can be so tricky to add and change working code. So it's a really good way to undo changes. It's a better way to collaborate than instead of emailing files backwards and forwards. You don't have to browse through a history of a document for timestamps. you name every time you make a change. So if you want to go back to a specific moment in time, we'll see later with the commit messages we're making, it's really easy to see when certain things were changed. And GitHub is incredible because it's one of the best ways to share your working code with the whole world. And that's kind of the concept of open source software, is software companies and software that allows the whole world to see every single moving part of the thing it's built. So yeah, if you've got your code on GitHub, it means that it's always in at least two places, one of them being on the internet. And if your local laptop breaks or your battery's dead or something like that, you'll always have a safe copy somewhere else. I like this meme because it kind of takes it down from the things I've just introduced, a whole load of benefits, but this thing says, this is Git. It tracks collaborative work on projects through a beautiful distributed graph theory tree model. Cool, how do we use it? No idea, just memorize these commands, type them to sync up. If you get errors, save your work elsewhere, delete the project and download a fresh copy. So it can be a little bit complicated. There are definitely points where you'll get frustrated and you'll wonder why developers spend so long using a tool like this, but I promise it is worth it. And the teething issues that you do experience and the overwhelm that you might get when you're first getting into it, things will make sense and things will start to get easier. I was one of the people that didn't believe I'd ever get it. And yeah, now I'm here showing you this presentation. So summary of the benefits. Every copy of a Git repository is a full backup of a project and its history. And then all you really need is a few easy to remember commands, which you'll get after a few times of doing them. And then GitHub as a hosting service is a free web-based collaborative service. So before I move on, are there any questions, anything you didn't get? I've not really gone into anything specific yet, but if you've got any questions or any comments, do let me know, put them in the chat. Yeah, okay, all clear. Thanks, Giovanna. So I said the word repository a few times. What is a repository? It's essentially just a big collection of all of a project's commits. So if we think about Facebook, that will be every single part of Facebook or if it's a monolith, I guess. In theory, everything is in one place and you can see all of the commits and all of the history, everything that's been added over time. And in those commits, you can see what was added, by who, and when. So we can think of it as like the one source of truth. I might have a version that's a few days old and Kimberly has another version which is even older than that. And we can't tell which one's the most up to date. The repository on the remote repository will be the best version and the source of truth if we're trying to figure that out. And then commit, we spoke about commits as well. It's a recorded set of changes in your project's files. So every time you want to add changes to a repository, you'll need to commit your changes. And this makes sure that we're not adding things we're not supposed to, and creates the record of the changes that we've made. And this is really important in the whole review process, approving and then merging, which we're going to cover as well. I like this diagram because it's really simple, and it's a great way of visually representing the few different stages that your files can be in. So if we look at the first one, history, the green, that's like the repository that's online. You're then getting those onto your local machine and you need to stage your changes, which is adding them before you commit them. And then you've got your working directory, which is your local laptop. You've made loads of changes. Then you add them to the stage, which means that you're getting ready to commit them. And then you commit them to the repository. And then that becomes a part of the history of the repository. And then one quick clarification is that Git and GitHub are not the same thing. So Git is the open source version control tool. So that's kind of like the language and the thing that we're going to be using within the terminal. And then GitHub is the company that hosts loads of Git repositories. So I believe it's the most popular one and has a web interface so that you can interact with repositories through your browsers, and you can host them there as well. So some of the commands you need to know, and don't worry, when we get to the workshop part in a minute, we will be doing it step by step, but just to introduce them. So Git adding and then specifying the file name means you're copying all of the files that you've made changes to or you've created at their current state right now and sticking them to the stage. You're moving them up to the stage, which means they're ready to be pushed up. So anything you do after you add those files isn't going to be on the stage. It's just at that moment that you commit them. Yeah, so it's important to remember that if you then change something, even make a couple of small like line changes, adding a comma or a dot, then those things are not on the stage. They're only at the stage that you do the git add command. Then there is git commit. And so once everything's on the stage, doing a git commit saves the snapshot of what is on the stage as a commit. So that's getting everything ready to push upwards. And at this point, you'll add a message. So it's really important here that you're clear and communicative about what you are committing, because you need to make sure that if not just you, but if somebody else looks at the commit message, they understand what that piece of work is doing. So it doesn't mean you need to tell an entire story about how you got there, but if you're adding a HTML page, which you're going to be doing, added HTML page is a good enough thing for me to be able to see what's been happening in this commit. And then git reset -- file name will be a handy one if you accidentally make changes to a file and then add it to the stage without meaning to. So you might accidentally edit a file, you might accidentally create a file that you didn't mean to, and git reset and then specifying the name of the file will unstage that or pull back the most recent version from the reset to the stage of the most recent version that you've got of the remote repository. So if you do it without the -- and file name, it will unstage everything and reset it to how it was before you added anything. And then, okay, so this isn't a very well formatted slide, but it says where to create the repository. It's really important to, every time that you create in a repository, which we're about to do in a moment, you will be creating a Git folder, or you'll be having a .git inside a folder, and that .git is something that tracks everything that's happening within that folder. So this is the magic part that tracks all the history and the changes and all of that. So deleting this folder undoes the initialization of a Git repository. So I've done this by accident, might happen to you at some point. If you do a git init in somewhere that you shouldn't have, like your desktop, it will then track absolutely everything that ever happens in that desktop. So you just need to delete the .git and it will stop doing that. And likewise, if you've initialized somewhere else that you shouldn't have, you'll be able to undo it by deleting the .git folder. And then another common mistake that I still make quite often is pushing before pulling. So think of pushing as you putting the change up into the remote repository, and pulling is getting all of those changes that have been made by people other than you at other points in time from other places. So if you were to push before pulling and someone else has already committed work which touches on the same files as you and makes changes that conflict with yours, you'll get a merge conflict. And so a merge conflict is easy to diagnose with the Git status, but it will prevent you from being able to push those changes because Git is being clever and saying you aren't really able to do this because you're going to overwrite or change somebody else's work. So make sure that you add the file after fixing the conflict as well. Okay, it's now time to start. So if you could all go ahead and wherever you keep your side projects or your bits of code, or if you don't have anywhere, just stick it on your desktop and create a folder called codebar. And then if you could side the folder, create a file called readme.md. So we're not doing anything inside an IDE yet, or although if you would like to, you can do that too. But yeah, just creating a folder called codebar, an empty folder, and then inside that, a file called readme.md. Great, so we've got that done. We're now going to try and connect our own personal GitHubs to our terminal. So if you can open up a terminal, that would be great. So you can do this, a lot of IDEs have a terminal built in, so you can do it straight in there. Or from your, I don't know what it's called in Windows, but yeah, it's terminal in Mac. And then we're going to do git config -- global user.name, and then you're going to put your GitHub name in there. So to see your Git, let me grab some links. To see your username, just go to your profile in GitHub. So your terminal is what you can see in the screenshot at the bottom there, where it's kind of like where you would put commands, command line terminal, command line interface, sorry. So you do that one first, and obviously within the quotes, put your own name. And then the second one is the similar, but with email, and then put your email in there. So now you could navigate to the directory with the README file. So to move around in command line is, if you should be able to do CD. Well, it depends on your file path. If you've made it on your desktop, you should just be able to CD into codebar, which was the name of your folder. And if you want to check where you are, you can do ls, which should list all the things in the directory that you're in. So if you CD into codebar and then do ls, you should see that it will show you all the things in that folder, which should be your README file. So yeah, we're making sure that we've moved into the right folder, just because, as I mentioned before, the next part, we're going to initialize the repository. Yeah, we want to make sure we're in the right place to do that. Okay, cool. I'm going to move on. The next part, we're going to initialize the repository. So now that you're 100% definitely in your the right folder, and again, you can do it, just type ls and then enter, and then it will tell you. We want to do a git init. And so this is now going to tell Git that you want to track every single change that happens inside this folder. It's going to initialize a Git repository. So we're going to see that there's another way to start a repository when we move on later on. But the reason we're doing it this way is just in case you guys have any local things that you have on your computer, any kind of side projects or anything like that you would now, after this, like to put on GitHub. So this would be the way to do that. And now, if we have initialized and that's gone okay, we should be able to do a git status. And I'm going to pause here to let you let me know if you're able to see any changes. Amazing. So you have an untracked file. That's great. That means that Git has found a file inside your new repository that is not being tracked. So that's great news. This will also be the point where we might get some error messages. So do shout out if you have any of those as well. I'm going to move on. So we see that we have initialized our repository. We can see we've got changes. So now we need to tell Git that these are the changes that we'd like to save. And we can do that by doing git add and then the name of our file, which is hopefully readme.md. And the second, so there's another way to add files, but this is a slightly more dangerous way. And there are a lot of people who would say you should never do it because it can lead to some changes that you're not expecting. But if you do git add space dot, then that adds absolutely everything, every single file that Git has noticed you've changed. So it's dangerous because you could, if you're not checking enough, accidentally add a load of changes you don't mean to. Yes, that's the other way to do it. But I would highly recommend specifying the names of the files that you want to add. So now we've added those changes. It's really, really good practice to get into the habit of anytime you do anything with Git, straight away, do a git status. It will help a lot with you remembering what's going on, because as you'll see, the order can get a bit confusing, but it will also, you'll hopefully any errors that you might have made in the adding, committing, pushing stages. So now if we do a git status, we should hopefully see that those untracked files are now being tracked and they've been staged. And again, remember, staging is meaning that we're ready to commit them. So it doesn't mean we've saved anything yet. It just means that we've confirmed that this is the change we want to save. I'm going to pause here again. So now that we have got to the point where we are ready to merge our changes, we've staged the things that we want to add, we can do a git commit -m. -m is specifying that you're about to add your commit message. And then we're going to put in open double quotes, added readme.md. And so this is letting my future self and also anybody else who's going to look at this code, what you did in this commit. There are lots of opinions on like what good commit messages look like, and every software company might do it slightly differently. I've spoken to people who say they write paragraphs for their git commit messages, and I've spoken to people who just put fixed tests. It will depend, but generally a good rule of thumb is like can I gather what's happened here in a simple and easy way? And I think we've made such a little change that this shorter message is fine. And now, can you guess what we might do next? We're going to do git status again. Yes, so nothing to commit working tree clean. Your working tree is, we saw in that diagram before, that's your laptop right now. So yeah, it's saying that you've not made any changes that aren't ready to be pushed right now. If we do a git push, what will happen now? Oh, sorry, I realized I'm pausing my screen. Yeah, the next one, git push, and this is us pushing the changes. So hopefully you did get an error message with this one. That's on purpose. We have not yet connected our local Git repository to one that is remote and that exists on GitHub. So at this point, there's nowhere for you pushing the code. There's nowhere for it to go. And so what we will need to do before pushing is connecting our local repository to the remote one. So yeah, the next step, if you can please open your browsers and head to your GitHub and go to the create repository part. Oh wait, I can't because it's dynamic to your own profile. So you just go to GitHub and navigate to, yeah, your repositories. You should have that little green new button. And then what we will want to do is when we're creating our local repo, we're going to name it codebar, which is the same name as our directory. We generally want to keep them the same just because it's easier semantically. It means that we're less likely to get confused about what the repository in GitHub is for, because it's the same as the directory name, and you will be the owner. And then further down, I'm not sure, it should be configured like this by default, but you want to keep it public, and you don't want to add a README because we've already got one, so don't add it. We've had this mistake before, so untick that if it's ticked. And you don't need a license, and for this we don't need to add a git ignore. And quickly, just what a git ignore is it's a way to add a set of files that you want Git to ignore whenever you change them on your machine. So there's certain kinds of files and certain things that might change over time on your local machine compared to what's online on the repository, and you don't always want Git to track that and get cluttered with all of those things. So you can make Git blanket ignore them, and we don't need to do any of that today, so we can just leave that as blank. So if you hit the create button, which should be underneath this stuff, then GitHub will give you hopefully a quick setup guide, and in there you're going to have a HTTPS. I'm going to do it over HTTPS today, a link which you can use to connect your two repositories. So if you scroll further down, it will tell you that you can push to an existing repository in the command line, and that is by doing git remote add origin and then inserting your link. So my link was the one in the previous screenshot. You should have it at the top as well. Just to go over what origin means and why we're calling it origin when we're adding origin. This is, now you're connecting these two places, these two repositories. Origin is the shorthand name for remote repository. So it just means the source of truth that we were referring to, which is online, and usually where the project is cloned from, although with this example, we've done it the other way around. We're creating our repository locally and then connecting them. So yeah, it's instead of having to copy and paste the same link every time, you should be able to just push to the origin. So fatal, yes. So the current branch main has no upstream branch. To push the current branch and set the remote as upstream, use git push set upstream origin main. So yeah, you can configure this later to do it automatically for you, as it says in the message. But for now, you can just copy the message that the command it's giving you, which is to push. And basically, you're setting the upstream. So you're setting wherever you push to be that origin on that origin version. And we'll go into a little bit the differences between what we're doing today and what happens in software companies or bigger projects, which will prevent you from being able to push to the main branch immediately. But for now, yeah, we're able to do that here. So feel free to copy that command and then it should work for you. Okay, so now you do a git status, what do you see? So yeah, just to recap, the 3 steps to save are adding, committing, and then pushing. Not quite as simple as just a save, but you'll get the hang of it and you'll understand why it's important that they're separated into these 3 stages as well. Okay, so we can now pause on that, and I'm going to go through another concept and make it a little bit more complicated. So I'm going to do it through a little bit of a story that I found when I was trying to learn Git, which I found really helpful as a way to understand this concept. So if some of you may remember, in the late 90s and early 2000s, Neopets was a website that you could maintain or look after, like a little online pet. And every month, the whole website would be taken down for a few hours. And then you get the message like website under construction. Sometimes when it came back up, the changes weren't noticeable, but other times there would be like whole new sections. And this was usually done between the hours of 2 and 6 a.m. So what do you think they were doing in that time that they took it down? Again, feel free to put in the chat or unmute. Yeah, updates, for sure. And then I guess a follow on to that is, why do you think that they were taking the site down at 2 a.m. to do that? Yeah, to upload new files. Exactly. Prevent inconsistencies in case updates broke the site. Didn't have Git. Yeah, exactly. QA. Trying to do it and people might be using it. Exactly. So they try and find the hours that it was most likely not under use. So I use this example from the 90s and early 2000s because that's not something we see happening anymore. So when Apple releases a new firmware or has a new phone available, when they update their website, it's not needing to be taken down for a few hours unless something's gone wrong. So how do you think that's possible? How do you think that there can be an instantaneous update to a page without needing to have the hours of maintenance? CI/CD, yeah. But what, yeah, I guess, yeah. They're on another branch, yes. So they are able to have the separate versions and work on their own branches where they're updating those things. And then as soon as they're ready to make that change, they just switch the version that they're pointing to. So yeah, they're not needing to take down the entire website in order to slowly move things around. They've already got that new feature on a separate branch that they can just merge straight into main. So a concept I found really helpful to understand branches is, if you think about a drawing, a half-done drawing like this, and I'm asked to complete the drawing, complete the house, and complete the tree, and I've only got a couple of minutes, this might be something that I'm able to come up with. And if I asked Kimberly to do the same, she might come up with something a little bit different. And they're both great. They both have their differences and their similarities, and they both complete the task. But if I were to ask a computer to merge these 2 drawings by combining the best features of the 2 different projects, we could have some problems. And we can see that by having that problem, or actually, I'll stop there. What do you think, what kind of problems might the computer have? Yeah, conflicts. Yeah, what version of the window to keep? They are totally different. Yoga, exactly. So computers are very smart. Git is incredibly intelligent, but it's not necessarily able to tell which tree is the best one, which bits of the house to keep from each version. And it could end up being a big mess if it did try. So what's going to happen is it's going to throw up a merge conflict. And this is what happens if we have 2 versions of the code which are touching the same parts, but looking completely different. So yeah, if you look at this one, I've asked Kimberly to just draw the house and I'm just drawing the tree, we can see that this would be really easy for a computer to merge. And yeah, I like this example because it shows that if you were to separate them into 2 separate features, you can see that each of us was able to add more detail because we were able to focus on just that one part. And yeah, I think this is a really good way to understand why we have these different feature branches and why we try to maintain good Git hygiene where possible, because it means that between the two of us, we're both able to work on separate things and really easily combine those two different things. So with GitHub, we have Git branches. Sorry, with Git, we have Git branches. And so these are a pointer to a snapshot of specific changes. So if we want to create a new feature or fix a bug, no matter how big or small, you really want to split those pieces of work out and create a new branch to encapsulate just those changes. So you might have something that happens when you're working in software where you're fixing something or you're building something and you'll become really tempted to then fix something else while you're there. And I'm sure you will come across the advice to just encapsulate, try to keep it separate, make a note of the thing that you want to come back to, but try to keep that one branch specific to that one thing you're trying to do. So yeah, just to make it easier for yourself and for others to understand what's happening. And this is a really nice visual representation of what branching looks like, because it can kind of be tricky sometimes to visualize it if you've not used the concept before. And so this shows that between each step, so between 1 and 2, I'm creating a branch for a feature, I'm making changes to it by 3, and then once I'm done, I merge it back into the main branch. And so now the main branch has my changes from 2 and 3. And then you can see that at 4, adding tags to a point and then moving to create a separate branch. And somebody else creates a separate branch off at 6. And so what happens here is we've got 3 versions at the same time of the same code base with slightly different changes. And ideally, you want to make sure that we'll move into this again in a bit as well, but pulling regularly from the main branch just to make sure you've got the most up-to-date version. But you can see that what this makes it really easy to do is if you've created a branch and something's not working, you've really tried, you've made a few different changes, but you've decided you're not going to do that piece of work anymore, you can discontinue that development branch and it has no repercussions for any of what's happening in the main branch. Whereas here with 7 and 8, this person has now completed that piece of work and is able to merge that straight back into the main branch. So we're going to create a branch, and we're going to, in this branch, create a HTML page called index. So I want you to type in git branch and then the name of the branch, which will be index HTML page. And so if you were, that will create the branch, but it won't move you into there, like similar to how we had to move into the codebar folder. We're going to have to move into this index HTML page in Git. And so to do that, we need to check out to it. So then once we've created it, we'll do git checkout index HTML page. And that'll take us there. Just to check that we are actually there, we can do git branch, and that should tell us what branch we're in. You can get all kinds of fancy customizations to your terminal, to your CLI, and I really like the ones that make it easy to see which branch you're in, because it can get quite confusing sometimes. Amazing, switch to branch. And so now, if we've all managed to get to that point, let's add a new file to this new branch, or to this folder on this new branch. So inside your codebar folder, whether you've opened up your IDE and you're working in there, or if you'd like to do it from your file explorer, let's create a new file called index.html. Once we've done that, can you guess what I might ask you to do next? We always want to do git status. Just get into the habit of like, yeah, anytime you do anything in Git, just do a git status. Check which branch you're on, status of the repository, what files you've modified, where it's staged, not staged, ready to be committed. And now, Florian, we'll do a git add index.html and let Git know which changes we'd like to save. Git status again. Let's see if these changes have actually been staged and if there's any other sneaky changes that are trying to jump in as well. Another cool thing with CLI tools and customizations is that you can add aliases, which I recommend doing later on once you've gotten the hang of these commands. But for now, using the full ones is good, but it's really handy because I can do things like GS and GC, and that will do all, I don't have to type it out every time. But yeah, for now, it's good to get the hang of doing it like this. So now we're going to do git commit -m and then open quotes added index.html. So we're telling everybody and our future selves that we've added a new file. Awesome. So now we're going to check status again. Hopefully you should be able to see that those changes are ready to be committed. And something we can do so that we avoid the error message that came up before is to push, we will specify the origin. And so here we're telling it the origin is the branch that we have recently created, which is the index HTML page. So before we move on to the next bit, if you could all just do hopefully you're still in the folder, you should do an ls. Okay, so now I'd like you to do a git checkout main. And what we're doing is we're moving back to the remote, the main branch of our remote repository. So if we do the git checkout main, or I think for some of you it might have been called master, then we do an ls again, you should see that your index HTML page has disappeared. So not to panic, it just means that we are now on the version of the repository which doesn't have any of your new feature changes. So to update, and this will only work in your own personal projects because I'll talk about it in a minute, but to update, if we're now all inside the main branch, if we do git pull origin index HTML page, what we're saying is pull all the changes from that feature branch into the main branch. And then if you do that and then do an ls, you should see that your index page exists again, and it will exist in the main branch. So that is the concept of branching and how the basics of it work. And when you are working within a large project and within a team, whether that's open source or within a software company, that will be the way that you are most likely going to be working every day and contributing code to the giant code base that whatever you're building, how that works. But one major difference is that when you are working in a project, a group project with other people, you shouldn't just be able to pull any changes from every single branch you've made. If you were to be able to do that, you could take down the entire production, take down the whole website, and pull in loads of mistakes. So what you will do is instead of pulling from your branch, you'll create a pull request. And a pull request is it's a document, or I guess it's online, so it's not really a document, but it shows you the changes between the main branch and your feature branch. And once a pull request is opened, people can discuss on the pull request, write comments, review the potential changes, and this is an opportunity for other people to review your work and check that whatever it is that you're going to be adding isn't going to break or can be improved. So pull requests are incredible. They are a great way to learn about a code base if you read other people's pull requests. And yeah, they're a great way to make sure that you've not missed anything as well, because there have been a few times that I've needed to have something pointed out, or I've learned that something that I've written could have been written in a better way. So all of those things, yeah, will happen on a pull request. And once a pull request has been approved and meets the set of conditions that your company or the project needs in order to be able to merge, then at that point, it will be pulled into the main branch. So we've just done it like a shortcut way because we're pulling into our own project. So that's fine. And now we should have time to spice up our GitHub profiles. Asiya Sharif has written a lovely Medium blog on how to do this. And so I'm going to be basing it on the steps that she's put within her blog. And this is a way, as you can see from her profile, to make it a lot nicer to look at, a lot of information about her, and also, yeah, it's all free and hosted within GitHub. But before I do that, does anyone have any questions on what we've just gone over or any issues? How small or big do you recommend to make a commit? It's a really good question. And I think it's another one that varies a lot based on organization, person. One way I've heard to be good and like a way that I like to do it is like once I have a working thing. So I work with Python and I do mostly backend work. And so once I've got like a test that passes or I've added a function that runs, that's a good point to save. So it's like when you're writing a document and you've written a really good paragraph and you're like, okay, I'm ready to save that now. That's when I tend to do commits. When it's in like a small encapsulated, this is a significant change, then that's when I like to make a commit. Another thing that will happen is you'll have a test suite that will run loads of tests every time you make a commit. And it will run all the tests within the organization to check that your code hasn't broken anything. Some people like to say never to commit something that breaks a test, like always have working commits, which can be something that's hard to do. I definitely struggle with that. But yeah, it depends basically. It's up to you and up to your organization. I'm sure you'll get feedback on whether it's too often or not often enough. But just, yeah, a few times a day is when I feel like I've done a significant amount of work is my answer. But yeah. So, but that was a great question, by the way. Yeah, we're going to go back to the place where we create repositories. And we're now going to create a repository with the exact same name as our username. And you can see GitHub's giving me the message there telling me that it's a special repository that you can use to add a README to your GitHub profile. Make sure it's published and initialize it with a README to get started. So where we unticked that button before, we're now going to tick it. So it adds it automatically. And then, yeah, make sure that we've named it the exact same name as our username, which you should be able to see on the left of the /. So you now should see that you've got a little readme.md and it should say hi there. And you can see as well your commit history. So you can see there's been one commit and that was the initial commit, which was creating the readme. You can also see there's one branch there. Yeah, and we've created the remote repository now first. So two things, you can edit directly, you can edit your readme directly within this browser. So you can click on the little pencil that's here, you can edit it and you'll see that there are some commented out lines which you can use as a template to fill your information. So you can do it straight from the browser and that's fine. But you can also practice what we've done already and clone and have it locally on your computer. So if you are going to do it this way, make sure that you CD out of the folder, the codebar folder. You don't want to have it in the same place as your other work. So yeah, create a new folder and then the command would be git clone and then the name of the repository. Yeah, you can see it's a great way you'll often see on job applications, you get asked to put a link to your GitHub. And yeah, it's a great place to link to your projects that you've committed to. You can see there that Asiya has 32 repositories that she's got open. And that might not all be 32 of her own work. It could be some of them are open source projects that she has forked. And forking means taking a copy of that version and attaching it to your profile so that you can work with it yourself. So she might have forked some of those from other projects, and it would be great if she had some of them that she was particularly proud of and wanted to show off, and she linked straight to them in here. That's a really good way of seeing GitHub READMEs be used. But if you go to your GitHub profile, you should now see something like this, but just with obviously the hey message. So what's great about doing it within the browser is you can kind of get a visual feel for what committing does and what committing and pushing looks like from the browser, and that can be a lot easier. But it's also pretty fun to try it locally and just kind of get the hang of that pushing and pulling and adding from your command line. Is that something that you might be doing quite a lot when you're software engineers in the future, or software now? So you pretty much have all the tools necessary to be able to contribute to open source. Be incredible to see some of you doing Hacktoberfest, and yeah, just getting a feel for playing around with Git and GitHub. It's definitely something that takes a little bit of practice, and so I'm going to go through a couple of the things which I think are helpful for that. But before I move on, has anybody got any questions? Anything they'd like to ask? Doesn't have to be related to what I just spoke about, it could be anything. Great question, Giovanna. So if we have many changes on different files, do we add each file individually and do a git commit for each change? So you could if you wanted to, but what would make sense is, yes, if you're absolutely sure that every single change you've made in those files is something that you want to add, then you can use git add dot and then do one commit for all of them. But it could be quite good to add the files individually. I definitely don't think you need a commit for every change, because if you're doing front end work, for example, it might be that you need to change a few different things in a few different files to get one button to work. And so that getting that one button working might be a good one commit change. So you might have a few different files changed in every commit, but yeah, it's just use git add with caution. Make sure you're using loads of git statuses to make sure that you're committing the right things. So something I'd recommend after this is making your own little cheat sheet. These are some of the things that I think are really important, and I'll make sure to send through these slides as well so that you can all look at them whenever you need to or want to. But just kind of trying to get these concepts is really important, because, as I said, error messages will happen. You all seem to have been pretty lucky today, but your luck will run out at some point. So just making sure you understand these things can be really helpful. And then master the basics. So the adding, committing and pushing, try and get your practice in with that. And if you have somebody that you compare with, it would be great practice for you to share a repository and push and pull between those things, because that's when the errors start to happen. That's when there starts to be conflicts and issues, and trying to figure those things out can be, yeah, really good. And then, yeah, just some other resources. I think the GitHub docs in general are fantastic. If you have any questions or have anything that you want to understand a little bit more in more detail, go straight to GitHub, and they've got loads of great documentation on every single part of Git and GitHub. And then a resource I really find super helpful is called Oh Shit Git. And yeah, if you go to that site, you'll see it is, yeah, thanks, Kimberly. It's basically shows you anytime a specific error message happens, it will give you the solution. So I committed, and I immediately realized I need to make one small change. So instead of doing a whole extra commit like you mentioned, Giovanna, you can instead do git commit amend. It will then tell you that it's been able to add that change to it. And the same for like accidentally committing to the wrong branch, how to reset and stash and all these other things. Can be, yeah, love this page, still use it all the time. Thanks everybody for staying around this long and yeah, giving it a go.